So in the last video, we looked at Hobbes' transition from the claim that there would be a war of all against all if there were no government, to the conclusion that we should have government. And the basic idea is this, that everybody has a sort of natural inclination to survive. And given that we have a natural inclination to survive, we should attempt to eliminate the most dangerous situations possible. And the war of all against all is the single most dangerous situation possible, so we should seek to eliminate it. And then the question is, how can we do that? And you can see this person go through this reasoning. The war of all against all is dangerous. Well, the law of nature dictates that I don't endanger myself, so I should end the war of all against all. And then the question is, how do you do that? So this is the argument. It stems from the characterization of the war of all against all, the premise that the law of nature prohibits you from endangering yourself, to the conclusion that you should seek to eliminate the war of all against all, which means you need to get out of the state of nature, which means you should have government. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, Hobbes says you have to give up some aspect of the right of nature. So remember last time we said the right of nature is the right to do whatever you want, to use anything you want, including others' bodies, to advance your own interest. And Hobbes thinks you're going to have to give some of that up. So the right of nature you can think of as like an unlimited right. It's the right to everything. And what Hobbes says is you have to sort of say, look, I'm going to give up some aspect of that right. I'm going to accept that I have limited rights, provided that, and only provided that other people do too. So this stands for if and only if. So if you give up some rights, I might give up some rights, but I'm only going to give them up if you do too. So here you have two people, and they're going to try and make this work. One says, look, I'll give up my right to harm you if you give up your right to harm me, but otherwise I won't. This one says agreed. And this one says, how do we get this agreement going? And the idea is you make a contract, you make an agreement. So imagine they sort of decide to shake hands and make their contract and everything is great. But Hobbes says this isn't going to work. And the reason this isn't going to work is because each of them is going to go through the following thought process. So Maroon thinks he might break the contract, and Orange thinks she might break the contract. And Maroon thinks, look, I better be ready for him to break the contract or I could get hurt. And Orange thinks the very same thing. And then Maroon thinks the best way for me to be ready for him to break the contract is for me to break it first. There shouldn't be a comma there. And Orange thinks the very same thing. And so Maroon thinks I should break the contract as soon as possible. And Orange thinks the same thing. So the point here is you just can't rely on each other's words. Why? Because you're going to have incentive to break the contract, whatever you've said. Even if you've said, let's agree to this, I agree to it, you still have incentive to break it because you don't want to put yourself in danger by risking the other person attacking you before you attack them. And this is a quote from Hobbes down here. So we're back in the war of all against all. So simply making these kind of contracts won't help. And this is why, as I said in a previous video, in order to be meaningful, contracts need to be enforceable. Now, Hobbes considers some other possibilities. He thinks like, look, maybe you'll think conventional morality will do the work. So we have kind of come up with a moral code that allows us to get along. Hobbes says no way, because you always have incentive to violate the moral principles unless there is a bludgeon, unless there is a government that has the force, the ability to force you to follow the contracts. That is the ability to punish you if you deviate. Okay. And here's a passage which you can pause and read if you're interested. So how do we get these contracts going? Well, Hobbes, before he gives his answer, he's going to consider some other possibilities. He says, maybe we could look to animals and see how they manage to get along. And he says, that's not going to work. It's not going to work because animals don't lie, but people do. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Hobbes is right about these empirical claims. I think there's pretty strong evidence that apes lie. I think there's actually decent evidence that all sort of animals lie. But Hobbes just asserts that animals don't lie, and he says we do. So that's a crucial difference. We can make a contract without the intention of keeping it. He says animals have some natural predisposition to cooperate, but we don't. Again, I'm not endorsing Hobbes's claim about animals here, although this is true. Animals do have a predisposition to cooperate. But I'm also, in this case, I have more of a problem with his claim about us. I think we do have predispositions to cooperate, but Hobbes just says we don't. He says animals identify harm with injustice. So they think anytime you harm someone, it's bad, but we don't. We think sometimes harming people is good when we're punishing them so they get what they deserve. And that will allow us to sort of try and justify certain harms that otherwise would look unjustifiable. At any rate, Hobbes thinks for these reasons we can't look to animals. So he thinks maybe we should just try democracy, try everybody to, power spread equally among everyone. Everyone can contribute to deciding what the contract should be and how everybody will collectively enforce them. Hobbes says this is a terrible idea. So why is it a terrible idea? Well, again, we have our two people, and this one is going to think like, look, I don't know much, but I know I'm smarter than him. And remember, for Hobbes, when we're talking about being smarter than, it doesn't really matter if you're like cleverer than the other person, you're better at chess or whatever you might think is an indicator of being smart in some relevant sense. What matters is you think your beliefs are right. So when this person says this, what she means is, I may not know much, but I know when we disagree, I'm right. Why do we say that? Well, again, that's supposed to be trivial because your beliefs are your beliefs. If you thought this person was right, then you wouldn't have an opposing belief. And the other person thinks the same. So each person thinks her own view of what's best is the correct view of what's best. And, they may have disagreements. So this person might think like we should have a large police force with no weapons. And this person might think we should have a small police force that's heavily armed. And they disagree. There's going to be conflict. So here's Hobbes' idea. When we disagree, each of us thinks that we're right. So each thinks our view of what's best is correct. People have different views, so there's bound to be conflict. So if you have democracy, there's going to be a whole slew of different views. And you're going to end up with no way to choose a single view. But you can't have a society with multiple views. You can't have both a large unarmed police force and a small heavily armed police force. You need to make a choice. But Hobbes thinks there will be no way to make a choice in a democracy. So what can we do? He thinks we need to pick a leader. And we'll stop this video there and pick up next time talking about what that means.